Hello and welcome to today's eSeminar. If you're dizzy and confused by digital publishing, if you don't know the difference between an app and an ebook or where to get started, then you are in the right place. My name is Gavin Drake and it's my pleasure today to take you on a voyage of digital publishing discovery. One of the most common things I hear in my position are organizations, marketing departments, and designers and creative professionals in particular who know they need to be in digital publishing, but they simply don't know where or how to start. Hopefully by the end of this eSeminar you'll be less confused than when you started, and while there are certainly technical aspects to digital publishing, like anything that's new, it just takes a little time and exposure to the terminology to feel more comfortable. At a high level today, we'll look briefly at some of the current trends in the market. We'll explore the differences and similarities between apps and ebooks, look at your options for creating ebooks and apps and the costs involved, and then finally I'll introduce you to some of the solutions that Quark has available for digital publishing. Ebooks have been with us for many years. I can remember way back to Microsoft launching their first Microsoft Reader format that was more than a decade ago and getting my first ebooks on my Palm 5 PDA. What was missing though was really viable reading devices for ebooks, a wide range of content, and good solid marketplaces for purchasing those ebooks. It's really only been in recent years that that promise has started to become a reality. According to Apple's recent keynote presentation, there are 1.5 million ebooks in the iBook store, and they've had more than 400 million downloads of ebooks from Apple Store alone. And interestingly, when you look at figures from Amazon UK this August, they now are selling more ebooks than physical books, and one interesting aspect of that was that Kindle owners are now buying 4 times as many books as prior to owning a Kindle. So the ebook is actually driving up consumption of books overall. And then looking at the size of the market right now, in 2011, ebook revenues for US publishers alone doubled to $2 billion. One area that's really been the promise of ebooks is the growth in self-publishing. And by that, I don't mean vanity publishing, but really the ability for authors to overcome the many obstacles that have traditionally been put in place to enable you to publish a bestseller. In 2011, these figures from BookStats tell us that self-publishing rose by 50%, and there were more than 200,000 titles released by people that were self-publishing. So that's what's happening in the ebook market at a high level. How about the tablet and smartphone market? Well, how we're communicating is changing rapidly, but even so, the scale and pace of that change is tremendous. Just think about 1 billion consumers with at least one smartphone or tablet by 2016, and if you're like me, it's likely more than one device. This is driving significant changes in media consumption, and with digital media growing primarily at the expense of printed media. And those people that are using smartphones and tablets, when we look just at tablet usage, 70%, 77% of tablet owners use their tablets every day, and on average are spending almost 14 hours a week on their device. One of the big drivers, of course, of these tablet devices and smartphones has been the emergence of apps. And according to these Gartner figures, they expect 73 billion app downloads next year, and that's growing to 287 billion in 2016, with most of those apparently being free apps and a huge increase in in-app purchasing as well. Firstly, there are lots of different types of apps, from utilities to arcade games, but what we're going to concentrate on in this eSeminar are what we call content apps, and I'm going to segment those into 2 core groups. The first is one that the general public is probably most familiar with, which are apps focused towards consumers and external audiences such as customers, prospects, and investors who likely access those apps through public app stores. These include apps for customer communication, for customer loyalty, brand development. But equally important is what's happening in the corporate environment, with apps being produced by and for specific companies for their employees. And these are probably less visible because they're not necessarily distributed publicly. So for salespeople in the field to be able to access up-to-date product information, presentation, sales resources, as well as even to present directly to their customers using their tablet devices. In a retail environment, to enable retail sales staff to access product information and the latest special offers, campaigns, promotions that they may need to know about when they're interacting with customers. And in fact, really anyone that needs to access real-time information while they're on the go or are not working primarily in front of a computer. So for example, manufacturing companies, organizations with engineers out in the fields. Here are some of the more concrete examples of what we mean by content apps. So customer magazines, annual reports, product catalogs, product tours, training materials, sales support materials as examples. You can see there, they're all types of apps where really it's about the content and interacting with that content rather than about abstract functionality. I know one area that can catch people out when looking at digital publishing is exactly what's the difference between an app and an ebook and which is appropriate when and for what type of content. So let's compare and contrast these two. An app is an abbreviation for application that was widely coined by Apple and the iPhone and the Apple App Store. An app is just really a piece of software that runs on a device, a PC, a Mac, a tablet, or a smartphone. It's become very much synonymous, of course, with smartphones and tablet apps. An electronic book or ebook is a text and image-based publication in digital form produced on, published by, and readable on computers or other digital devices. The line between ebooks and app functionality is blurring as some of the newer file formats like EPUB 3 and the iBooks format incorporate more and more rich media content. And then EPUB may also be a name that you've heard of, and that's an ebook file format with the broadest acceptance and support in the market right now. It's an open format and can be read by dozens of handheld devices, smartphones, applications for desktop computers and laptops, such as the Nook, the Sony e-reader, and Apple's iBooks. In actual fact, when I counted, I found at least 29 different ebook file formats, but no doubt there are more. The good news is that you don't need to be concerned with all of them, and there really are just two formats in particular that will get you to the majority of reading devices and ebook stores on the market today. We've already mentioned EPUB, which gets you to pretty much every major device apart from the Kindle. For that, you're going to need the Kindle format, KF8. I'll also just mention the iBook format, which is created with the free iBooks Author ebook layout software that Apple produced. It's a proprietary format, but it is based on EPUB. The good news is that the iBooks reader also supports the EPUB format. As apps are operating system specific, you'll have to develop apps in a language and a format that's understood for each platform. There are really three main mobile operating systems that you should care about with the recent release of Windows 8. iOS apps will run on iPad, iPhone, and iPod Touch. Android apps will run on any Android device, including the Kindle Fire, Google Nexus, and Samsung Tab. By the way, if you are curious as to what an ice cream sandwich is, here it is. It's actually just the name of one of the Android operating system releases. While Windows 8 is very new, some analysts are expecting it to gain up to 30% of the market in the next few years. So you may not need to worry about that immediately, but it's certainly one to keep in mind for the future. So when we compare those two different things, ebooks with apps, ebooks tend to be much easier and less expensive to develop. The content reflows to match the device screen and the reader's preferred font size, so I can have that larger or smaller and wrap to my particular device. You can now optionally include inline audio, video, pictures, hyperlinks. There is interoperability between the different platforms, but I should point out that it's never identical because different features tend to get implemented and supported with different style sheets in slightly different ways on the different readers, which can be frustrated if you're used to having complete typographical control. You're definitely not going to get that when you're designing an ebook in a reflowable format like that. And ebooks tend to be ideal for things like fiction, content that's got limited interactivity requirements and is reflowable content. Apps, on the other hand, provide access to the full functionality of a particular platform. So, for example, if I want to access the accelerometer on my iPad or the geolocation information and act on that in some way. They therefore tend to be usually more feature rich and engaging, and you must develop a separate app for each platform. So I can't just create one app and expect that to be available on iOS and on Android. I'm going to have to develop a different app for each of those platforms. They are more complex and more expensive to develop than an ebook, but they also provide a much higher level of engagement and interactivity depending on what content you're delivering. And they're currently a lot more popular. Just looking at the numbers from Apple, they've had 30 billion app downloads versus 400 million iBook downloads from the iBook store. And really, apps are ideal for content that requires fixed layout, rich interactivity, and that app-like experience. So now just take a look at where and how you might sell an ebook versus selling an app, because it's easy to get confused between formats, manufacturers, hardware, and stores. So if we have a look just at the EPUB and that Kindle Format 8, you've got multiple manufacturers that are producing devices that support those formats: Apple, the Barnes & Noble Nook, Amazon, Sony, Kobo. And then each of those hardware manufacturers has multiple devices to meet different market requirements. And then each of those distributors also has their own store. So you can see there just 6 that I've mentioned. There are more stores than that. So you can see, just like distributing a physical book, it is complex to get all of the bases covered. That's why it's really important to decide where you want to start with your focus. Likewise for apps, if we just focus on those 3 operating systems that we talked about, so iOS, Android, and Windows, you're dealing with multiple versions of that operating system that you may need to support on devices. There are multiple hardware manufacturers. Each hardware manufacturer produces multiple devices that have got different capabilities, different screen sizes, different resolutions. And then there are multiple app stores. So there are app stores by the operating system vendors like Google and Apple. There are also vendor app stores like the Samsung App Store. And then you also have enterprise app stores as well. So it is reasonably complex, but it's good to understand where the marketplaces are and be able to separate out that from the operating systems and the file formats and the hardware that you want to deliver to. Okay, so let me now switch across to my mobile device. In this case, it's going to be my iPad, just so we can take a look at some examples of apps, ebook apps and ebooks, so that everyone is really on the same page, because I know that not everyone has access to an e-reader, a tablet, or a smartphone to see what some of these things actually look like. Okay, so let's take a little look here on the iPad and just kind of familiarize you with some of the things that you'll hear spoken about. So firstly is when people talk about branded apps and talk about having home screen experience, this is really what they mean. It means talking about having your brand right there visible on this home screen of the device. So you can see one example here, MyFord. I'm going to go ahead and open that up. It's a great example of a content app. And in this case, it's a multi-issue magazine. So what you first get when you open that app up is a kiosk, and I can see the different issues for this particular publication. So the app in this case really is a container, and then the content that you've designed is delivered into that app. Let's go ahead and open up one of those. Let's open up our winter 2012. And you can see that great looking content, richly designed, some fun features like tap to open and close the doors on the car. I can navigate around to different parts within the publication. I'm going to flip to my favorite, which is to go and customize my car. We'll switch that across. We can see we've got video content that's built in.
Basically, the Fiesta is the perfect road trip car.
So you can imagine for most organizations, being able to get this kind of brand exposure on the device is extremely important for them. And I know in this particular case, Ford are delighted with the fact that they can have their customers and potential customers spend so long engaging with their app on the device. Let's close that one down. This particular icon you'll see here is called Newsstand. So you may again have heard of Newsstand. Really, Newsstand is a particular type of app. So you can think of each of these publications in the Newsstand as being an app. They just get delivered in this particular format. So if I open up Good Food, which is another App Studio app, again, you can see this has its own format and layout. I can go ahead and I can download some preview issues of this publication. I can subscribe, I can do a one-off purchase, see what's available in my library. We'll go ahead, close that one back down. But what I want to have a look at next are ebooks. So there are native ebook readers like the Kindle, but most of the main ebook manufacturers also have apps available that run on multiple devices, including desktop computers. So you don't have to only be restricted to reading your ebooks on those devices. So as an example, you can see here the Kindle app, which enables me to access my library of books I bought for the Kindle. Go ahead and open one of those up. And you can see that the content is primarily text-based, if we flick our way through that, and the user gets control over things like font size, so I can make that font size and brightness larger or smaller. I can switch to a black background, a white background. So the content in here is reflowable content, which we'll talk about in just a moment as well. And if we flick back out of that, open up the Sony reader, you'll see a similar format. Let's open up this fiction book here, and again, primarily text-based content. Of course, it doesn't have to only be text-based content. This here is a children's book that's in the iBooks library, and you can see it's got inline images within it, which adds a little bit more interest, certainly in the case of children's books. And this Palm cookbook here is one that was produced using Quark Express. And again, you can see there's some level of formatting control, but this will look different depending on the device and the reader that you're looking at this content on. And then if we move outside of ebooks and we look at interactive ebooks as an example, I'm just going to go ahead and open this one up. So this is where someone may decide to go down an app route rather than an ebook route. So in the case of a children's book, this is a really nicely illustrated book that you probably don't want to have as reflowable text content. And they've gone ahead and integrated some nice sound effects and things into the book as well. That's just a quick tour, so you've got an idea of some of the terminology when we're talking about apps and ebooks and app stores and home screen and branded icons, so you know exactly what we mean by that. Okay, so let's have a look at where we get started with ebooks. So firstly, there are multiple options for creating ebooks, and I've listed a few of them, or at least the main ones, on the screen here. You could use an XML editor. That's not generally going to be a popular option for authors, but it is an option. There are free tools out there like Calibra, iBooks Author, for example. Those are all okay, but it's generally going to mean manual rework if you happen to have that content in a different format. There are also sites like Smashwords that are based on Microsoft Word, publishing provider tools such as ePubli, the Kindle Direct Publishing. What's interesting about some of these options, including Smashwords, is that they will take on the distribution part for you, although obviously at a cost. And you could use professional design and layout software such as Quark Express 9. That option puts you in control and makes for a reasonably visual and easy route for creating good-looking ebooks. If you're also creating books for print, then it's an even more obvious choice. If you think your book demands a more interactive treatment, such as a children's book, for example, then you might want to look at creating a native app using a digital publishing solution like App Studio. So there are lots of different ebook workflows depending on the tools you're going to use and the bookstores that you're publishing to. So I'm going to look at just one example to make this a little bit real for you. So let's say that you use Quark Express as your starting point to create that ebook. You export that into the Kindle format. You then go to the Kindle Direct publishing website where you submit that. If that gets approved and processed and goes through all the checks and balances, that makes its way onto Amazon's Kindle store where a consumer purchases that. They then will download that book into the Kindle app. If they're on a device like the iPad, or if they're on an actual Kindle, they'll download that directly to their Kindle device. And then, this example is from my iPad, but then they'll have that book show up where they can consume it on their device. And of course, that can equally apply to all of those others that we've talked about as well. So if we look at ebook costs, primary costs for publishing an ebook are the cost for creating or converting the content into an ebook format. So some people certainly pay to have an outsourced company do that for them. That could be the cost of the software like Quark Express 9 to do that. And then in some cases you'll pay a fixed fee to process and distribute your ebook, or you will give up some amount of margin to the distributor. So Apple and Amazon, for example, will give you 70% and they'll take 30% of the sale price, while Barnes & Noble and Sony, I believe, will give you 50%. One of the interesting things about ebooks is you don't necessarily need to use one of those content distribution providers in order to distribute your ebook. Now, of course, if you're trying to get that bestseller, then chances are you're going to want the exposure that you get on those particular stores. But perhaps you're doing something that is a corporate ebook, so you can very easily make those ebooks available on your website and sideload those onto those devices without you having to go through some of those distribution costs. So that's something to think about as well. So let's look at a similar approach with content apps. Now, the simplest approach for delivering content to a mobile device, and probably the fastest to get going with, is to use something that has a flipbook style PDF solution. They're particularly useful if your goal is just to provide publicly accessible information on the device, such as a quarterly report or a newsletter, and other kind of generic publications. The issue you're going to face, though, is that consumers and business expectations of what they expect to get on their expensive tablets and smartphones have really evolved substantially. And while delivering a PDF might be easy, it's ultimately pretty boring. It's going to offer little control over interactivity and a reasonably poor reading experience that's likely to disappoint your customer. So I'd ultimately recommend the use of PDFs as something you might include within a native app. Perhaps you have some supporting reference material that you don't want to have to recreate, but I wouldn't advise using PDFs as the basis for delivering content to those devices. At the other end of the spectrum are custom developed solutions that can be developed externally or by hiring internal development resources, or if you really want to, learning to develop yourself. These are often the primary option for meeting more sophisticated requirements. So, for example, if you want custom functionality like integration with the banking system, or some unique and complex features like those required in a game or a catch-up television service. So in cases where you want to create what's probably less of a content app and more of a deep functional app. The primary drawbacks of custom developed solutions are they do require highly skilled developers and ongoing IT support, and they're both slow to deploy and significantly more costly to maintain. So typically you should be thinking in terms of an additional 50% development cost for each additional platform you create apps for. In addition, your in-house publishing and IT teams are likely to not have the expertise or experience to create and deliver those personalized content apps to mobile devices, so you're likely to require additional support from specialists as well. To help organizations and creative professionals meet their mobile publishing goals without the expense of building custom in-house solutions, vendors that have got backgrounds in page layout, design, and corporate publishing have been providing digital publishing software to try and bridge that gap. Even during the short time since digital publishing solutions have become available, they're fast closing the gap in functionality between the custom developed apps. So the advantages are they don't require a user in theory to learn to program code. You get a branded app experience. You get complete design control and the ability to create a unique tablet experience with your content. You hopefully get the option to sell app content, whether that's the app itself or content within the app. And you can enhance those apps with web content, and they are certainly easier and more affordable than going down a custom app route. There are disadvantages as well. Depending on who you go with, you're typically going to have some level of vendor lock-in once you've made that solution. And not all solutions are equal, so you're going to need to choose very carefully when you're looking at your options there. We'll give you the slides afterwards as a follow-up, so these are kind of more reference charts for you, but this is just a snapshot of some of the key considerations you may want to look at when you're considering creating content apps. As I said earlier, I should probably point out that not all solutions are equal. So, for example, not all digital publishing solutions are going to provide you with all of the requirements we've outlined here. So these are just good questions to ask when you're doing your research. Now, it's a little more tricky to provide an example of an app workflow because they all can be extremely different depending on the technology that's involved. So all I've done here is built out an example, a simple example based on content creation in Quark Express and using the App Studio publishing portal. So firstly, you would use Quark Express in this example to create your app content and all your interactivity. You would then upload that to the App Studio publishing portal. The App Studio publishing portal would take care of creating your branded app, and that then gets delivered by you into one of those public app stores, or potentially it could be an enterprise app store that you've created within your company. And then that branded app gets delivered onto the consumer's device. The other thing that happens alongside that is that rich interactive content you created in Quark Express gets delivered into that app, and then you can deliver, your second issue, your third issue, etc. into that same app. An app publishing is really considerably more expensive than ebook publishing, and there are also a number of different places where you're going to incur costs, and those places will vary depending on the solution. In all cases, if you want to make your app available in one of the main app stores, there is going to be an app developer cost. We'll look at those a little more in a moment. If you go down the custom app route, companies are spending anywhere from $5,000 up to six-figure numbers, and it really all depends on who you work with and what you're asking for. Digital publishing software is typically going to work out less expensive than custom app development, but most vendors have different charging models. You'll likely need software, if you don't already have that, for creating the interactive content, for example, Quark Express. Some vendors will then charge per app creation, and then potentially for each issue that you create, so each monthly issue of your magazine or daily issue of a newspaper. And almost all of the vendors will have some sort of charging model for each download of your content to the app, as they are typically hosting your content on their servers, so they've got costs they incur every time someone downloads an issue of a magazine, for example. So some vendors will let you host content on your own web service, but of course there's still a cost implied there as well. Lastly, if you intend to sell your apps or the content within your apps, then you're likely to have to pay a margin to the distributor. Both Apple and Google will keep 30% of any app revenue sell through their stores. And while there are app stores that take less margin, they also don't have the millions of visitors that the main app stores do. So really you are paying for their marketing services to expose your app to that audience. So all of that can sound pretty onerous, but remember, compared to the equivalent costs for printed publications, it's still likely to work out a far more cost-effective way to reach a broad audience, and to do so with far more limited risk. So just to come back on the developer programs, Apple themselves have several different iOS developer programs, the two most popular being their iOS developer programs, Individual and Company, and that enables you to get your app into the Apple App Store. Those cost $99 a year, and you'll get access to all their online development portals and development tools. So If you're using a digital publishing solution, you may not need those actual development tools, but you'll certainly need access to that developer account in order to submit your apps to the App Store, set up payment methods, etc. If you're developing apps that you don't want to be available in the public store, and you want to distribute those internally, for example, then you're going to need to sign up for an iOS Developer Enterprise program, which is $299 a year. And it's important to note that the Enterprise program and the standard developer programs are mutually exclusive. So if you want to distribute one app into the public app store, and then you also have internal apps that you want to distribute, you'll need to be a member of both of those programs. Google also has a developer registration which costs $25. According to Google, that's just to reduce the number of spam type apps that get created. So you'll need to sign up for that. And then you'll also need to sign up for a Google Play account to distribute your app, Google Play being the name of the Google App Store. Just coming back to cost briefly, one thing you do need to think about are what your ongoing costs are for delivering apps. So you should certainly expect it's going to cost you a lot more to get started when it comes to the custom apps, but also it's going to have a larger ongoing cost just for simple things like you want to rev your app to support the latest version of iOS. Well, chances are that's going to mean you're going back to that development company and asking them to develop an app update. Whereas with some of the digital publishing solutions, chances are you will get those app updates to support the new operating system and new features just included within your general costs. The other cost consideration is just thinking about what it costs to add incremental platforms. Again, if you're looking at the PDF and the digital publishing software approach, there's always going to be some level of incremental cost when you go to a new app platform, but it shouldn't be substantial versus your upfront costs. When it comes to custom apps, you can probably count on at least 50% of the cost again that you're going to have to incur each time you want to go to a new platform. So considering all the costs for apps in particular, I think it's important to know what your business goals are before you get started. So these are just some examples. Generate new revenue, which could be by selling your app or your app content. It could be by selling advertising. It could be a digital storefront of part of your e-commerce model for a catalog. It could be just heighten brand awareness and experience. It could be increasing your customer satisfaction and engagement. It could be speeding up delivery of information to employees. It could be just simply reducing costs, which I know is a big driver amongst a lot of large organizations that see huge opportunity for cost reductions there. So be clear on that. And then once you know what your business requirements are, think about what your requirements are going to be for building an app to meet those business goals. So here I've got a list of some general questions that you might want to ask yourselves, like whether my app needs to be branded. Is my content ready for mobile devices? How much do I care about that brand design and control? Am I going to charge for my app? And what budgets and resources do I have to put against this? Given an infinite amount of time and resource, you can do anything, but that's not the reality. So what's the reality of what you can really put behind this? And then if you're a larger organization, there are some additional requirements you're going to want to think about, such as, do I need to give secure user-based access to content? Do I need to provide an internal app? And if so, how do I deploy that outside of the App Store? Is there a way that I can do this in a sustainable approach? So lots of good questions to ask yourself as you go through that requirement gathering phase. Right, let's take a look now at the Quark solutions. So firstly, we'll have a look at eBooks. I think that's reasonably straightforward. Quark Express 9, certainly to our mind, is one of the best tools out there for creating ebooks, whether you're started from a printed book and you want, or you just want to create a brand new ebook from scratch, and the software accommodates both of those workflows. You can apply basic styling. You can add table of contents that can be targeted towards either EPUB or Kindle. You can add audio, video, and hyperlinks that use the EPUB 3 standard, and it's great at handling images, as well as features that you need around East Asian ebooks if that's something that's important to you. So most importantly, it gets you to the two major ebook formats that will get you into all of the major bookstores, which is EPUB and Kindle. For apps, we're extremely excited to introduce you to App Studio. App Studio is the leading cloud-based HTML5 solution that turns print into interactive tablet and smartphone experiences. It's already being used to create award-winning apps such as the Metro newspaper and the British Medical Journal, and other big-name brands such as the BBC Good Food magazine Stuff and My Ford. It can scale from niche publications through to consumer-level apps with millions of downloads. One of the things that sets App Studio apart is that you can create content in Quark Express or InDesign. You can develop content directly in HTML5, or you can even automate digital publishing through XML and Quark's enterprise solutions. All content and apps are managed through the App Studio cloud platform, from where apps are created, and content is also distributed out to all of the devices. So you can get to iPad, to iPhone, Kindle Fire, all of the Android tablets and smartphones. We even have some customers that are deploying web apps that deliver an app-like experience directly to a tablet browser, but without having to go through the App Store. So you get to control the content, access to the content, and the revenue models around it. If you're a designer, the process is really easy. You create the content in the tools you already know, you upload that content without even leaving your design software, and once you're happy with it, you can build your app and publish the app and the content directly to the online stores. One of the things that customers will love about App Studio is the rich array of interactivity, including some unique tablet experience features like scrollable layouts, 360-degree images, hotspots, pop-ups, geolocation, and a lot more. And you can start to see why, when you go down this app route, it makes a big difference compared to some of those static PDF experiences that we talked about earlier. So why App Studio versus all of the other solutions on the market today? Well, although the brand is new, the technology has been tried and tested by some of the biggest names in the world. App Studio utilizes HTML5, which makes it utterly unique and leading edge in its approach, but I'll speak more to that in a moment. It promotes sharing, tagging, bookmarking. It's extremely easy to use, no new software to learn. Fantastic interactivity. It can be customized in terms of custom feature development. Google Analytics are built in, so you can get rich information on how your readers are consuming the content you create within your apps. It's been built for automation, and there are customers already using it for automation. And it's based on an award-winning user experience that really combines years of development experience working in this mobile space. And again, uniquely supports content coming from Quark Express, InDesign, HTML5 and XML, and you can even combine content from different sources inside the same app. When we first started building App Studio, we could see the increasing device diversity and the challenge of rapidly supporting apps on multiple platforms, as well as the humongous file download sizes that some of those original tablet publications, such as consumer magazines on the iPad, delivered. We therefore wanted to take a completely different approach to what everyone else was doing at the time, which was overlaying PDFs, images, rasterized text with interactivity. Instead, we quickly identified that HTML5 was the way forward. The challenge, of course, was taking rich design layouts and reproducing them as pixel-perfect publications in HTML5. It's something the team has taken a long time to perfect and get right to deliver that consistent experience across all of those different devices, but the results really are stunning. You get real selectable, searchable text. You can even search not just within one issue of an app magazine, for example. You can search across all of them. As the text is real, it also means you get to take full advantage of all the accessibility features on the device. HTML5 is an incredibly rich open standard compared to previous versions of HTML, which means it natively supports lots of cool interactive features. And we can therefore deliver native interactivity, which means you can interact far more with objects on the screen than in other solutions. HTML5 is platform independent, which means your content is platform independent and you're not locked into a proprietary file format. You're also going to benefit from smaller file sizes, stunning rendering that takes full advantage of the screen that you're using without having to make multiple optimized versions of your app. Now, when someone says HTML5, you probably immediately think of web pages. Well, that's not exactly true in terms of what App Studio delivers. We actually create a hybrid app that combines native code, for example, for iOS with HTML5 for content. So it means we can take full advantage of the device features and provide that native feel for users and with great performance, but without the heavy amount of native device code that is typically apparent in digital publishing solutions. So if you take a look at this comparison, you can see that those first generation digital publishing solutions produce apps that are firstly much larger than App Studio apps, but also primarily native code combined with JPEGs, with PDFs, with some interactivity, and possibly have some HTML embedded within those pages. So when you see some of those other solutions saying they're HTML5 apps, what they generally mean is they can put some HTML5 within a page within the app. So that brings a lack of agility in reaching new platforms that might become available. In contrast, this next generation HTML5 based approach that App Studio takes gives you a hybrid app that brings consumers that engaging familiar smartphone tablet features but using HTML5. So the native component is small and the majority of the app is actually HTML5. So let's take a look at that in another way in terms of user experience. So there's always going to be a trade-off between richness of features and the customer experience versus the effort and the costs involved to implement that. So what we're starting to see now, though, is really a convergence there. So if we look at PDF type examples that we talked about and enhanced PDFs, the effort to produce apps that utilize that is reasonably low, but then the user experience is also very basic. First generation overlay approach of digital publishing solutions really have started to push the boundaries a little bit in terms of that user experience with a little bit of incremental effort and cost. And then if you want to go all the way out there, custom apps will get you that great user experience, but the cost and the time and work and effort involved is high. And I guess arguably I could have extended that custom app line right the way to the left of the page, because it's a custom app. That doesn't mean it's good, but typically it's going to be your most expensive and your best user experience. But really what we're finding now with this second generation HTML5 approach that App Studio takes is you get all of the benefits of that great user experience without the high costs and effort associated with custom apps, and really starting to push the boundaries where that gap is closing substantially with custom apps. Now, while I expect many of you on this eSeminar are happy with that kind of handcrafting of apps as the way to go, and for a large amount of people that will make sense, I also just wanted to point out that if you're producing large volumes of content, potentially not just for digital devices but also for other media, you may want to look at a more efficient solution that avoids copy and paste and manual page layout. So a great example would be journal publishers like the New England Journal of Medicine, the British Medical Journal, who produce high volumes of content with frequent updates, and manually paginating app content just wouldn't be sustainable for them. So the solution might be obvious, but really what you need to do is to streamline and automate the process, and that involves creating smart content up front in order to automate the process downstream. And combining that smart authoring, collaboration, workflow, multi-channel output is really what we describe as dynamic publishing. Now, here are some examples if you are going down that enterprise digital publishing route of the sorts of additional features that you'll probably be looking for. So things like user role-based access to content, internal app deployment, higher levels of security. You may want to do that single-sourced XML-based publishing, review approval, etc. So they're just some of the things that we add into App Studio when you're looking at our enterprise offerings. And to maybe make that just a little bit more visual, you can see in this diagram the App Studio icon over there to the top right, but you'll see here a complete dynamic publishing workflow where you have all sorts of rich media content that starts in the creation phase, but you also have their Quark XML author with Microsoft Word where you're creating structured smart content. You're managing that in a structured and automated way with collaboration, with review and approval. You may be integrating with third-party data sources. Perhaps you want to bring in financial data that needs to stream into your app, or with an enterprise content management system. And then you automate the output, not just to digital, but to ebooks, to print, to email, to all those different file formats and media that you may want to communicate with your customers through. So this is something we're working with a large number of customers globally to do, and if that's of interest, then you can find out more about Quark's enterprise solutions by going to quark.com/enterprise. So why Quark? Well, we've been doing this for a relatively long amount of time, and especially considering how the market has evolved so quickly. We've helped a large number of customers take their content to the iPad and other tablet devices. But it's not just a question of volume of apps, it's also quality. And you can see that many of those apps are award-winning apps in very competitive spaces. For example, the Metro app won the App of the Year at the 2012 Newspaper Awards. So to finish, let me wrap up with some brief thoughts for you in terms of next steps. Firstly, digital publishing is not something that you need to be fearful of. It's what you already do in other media. It's about customer communications. Yes, it's a new media, there are new devices, but 70% of what you already know can be directly applied to digital publishing. So think about whether ebooks or apps is going to be the right route for you. And then irrespective of your choice, don't try to boil the ocean. 80% of the audience you want to address are probably on 20% of the mobile platforms and stores. So start by focusing on those first. So in the case of apps, focus on iOS and the Apple App Store if you're going to do apps, and EPUB and Kindle on the Amazon and Apple iBook stores if you're going to do ebooks. These are going to enable you to learn a lot. You're going to be able to test the market before you embrace other platforms, and probably get to a large percentage of the audience that you want to address anyway. For apps, if you produce a periodical such as a monthly magazine, then explore if there are options to do a one-off single edition publication as an app rather than diving straight into a regular publishing commitment. Again, it's a low-cost, low-risk way to try things out first. Be very careful when you're evaluating vendors, and I say that as someone that's looked at lots of different vendors in this market. As you'll see with App Studio, we've tried to be as transparent and straightforward with the costs and prices as we can, but many of the vendors' prices will vary quite differently, and they may sound attractive, like we'll give you unlimited apps until you figure out just how much you're going to pay for issue download costs, for example. So look carefully, make sure you really understand all the different costs involved and what your risks are and opportunities are before you jump in there. And looking for a solution that you can try for free is also a great way to start. That's again not the case with all the solutions. With App Studio, you can get started for free, so you can try it out, make sure you're comfortable with the solution before you dive in and make any financial commitments. In closing, we'll follow up after the eSeminar with a copy of my slides, access to a recording of the eSeminar, and details of where to download a free book, which is Jay Nelson's Guide to Self-Publishing. You can find out more about App Studio at appstudio.net, including information on creating a free trial account and signing up for upcoming App Studio eSeminars, where we'll show you how to create app content in Quark Express and InDesign, as well as how to publish your app to the app stores. So if you do have questions, feel free to email me directly. My email there on the screen is gdrake, Gdrake, @quark.com, and I will get back to you just as soon as I can with my answers. So thank you very much for your time. If you're less confused than when you started, please let me know. And if the opposite is true, I'd love to hear from you too. We hope to partner with you to deliver some stunning digital publishing products over the coming months. And thank you very much for your time.